Joining us today to discuss the public health war on vaping and FDA's growing crackdown on the industry is eminent researcher and world-leading tobacco control scientist, Dr. David Abrams. Dr. Abrams is quite simply at the top of his field. He was a professor and founding director of the Centers for Behavioral and Preventive Medicine at Brown University Medical School. He then directed the Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research at the National Institutes of Health, the NIH. Until 2017, he was professor of health behavior and society at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and he's the founding executive director of the Schroeder National Institute of Tobacco Research and Policy Studies at Truth Initiative. Dr. Abrams has published over 250 peer-reviewed scholarly articles and been a principal investigator on numerous NIH grants. He is lead author of the Tobacco Dependence Treatment Handbook, and he served on expert panels at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and he served on the Board of Scientific Advisors of the National Cancer Institute. Dr. Abrams, thank you for joining us today on RegWatch.
You're welcome.
Tell us about where you are right now.
I'm now a professor at the NYU College of Global Public Health in New York City.
The Big Apple. Well, we've been wanting to talk to you for some time, Dr. Abrams. As you know, the FDA did an abrupt turn on vaping in September, announcing what it calls an historic enforcement action that is intended to combat what the agency calls an epidemic of teen vaping. What do you make of that?
Well, it certainly is of concern to try to keep any and all nicotine products out of the hands of youth and young adults who haven't started using much more lethal tobacco products like cigarettes or little cigars. So in general, I think we all agree that we should keep nicotine products away from underage youth. We have not yet seen the data that the FDA is citing for its historic claim that we now have a massive jump in e-cigarette use in high schools in particular and among young people. However, it is of concern, and I would say that we do need to look at all the ways that we could restrict and limit these novel new products from getting into the hands of youth. But I don't think it's necessarily a simple answer. I think, for example, parents, teachers, local communities, and some of the companies, some of which do not make lethal cigarettes and do not behave like big tobacco. They're actually trying to help people switch or quit the much more lethal cigarette, are all on our side in terms of harm reduction. So it's a tricky thing to thread this needle to protect our kids as much as possible while ensuring that these innovative breakthrough products could really be readily available to help smokers who are unable to stop smoking to switch to a much less harmful alternative.
So is it fair, or is it even proper scientifically, to demonize vaping and to have this crackdown, which really is affecting companies and vapors, without actually any evidence to support the fact that there is this epidemic?
Well, I certainly don't think it's fair to crack down and demonize nicotine per se. Nicotine actually can be our ally in helping people who need nicotine or want nicotine to switch from a much more lethal way of delivering nicotine. People have said, you smoke for the nicotine, but you die from the tar and all the carcinogens in the burnt tobacco. None of that is present in e-cigarettes. So again, we need to find a balance. So I believe the FDA has said that they have new data that there's a 75% increase in past 30-day vaping among youth, and that is cause for alarm.
Well, we know that the 30-day past use is a suspect measurement anyhow, isn't it?
Well, it is. It seems to be more reliable as a measure of experimentation, curiosity, and novelty. What we do know when we look at the whole context is that the vast majority of youth who are using these products are already also using cigarettes or other tobacco products. And they also are trying marijuana, alcohol, and other products. So these are the kids who generally are risk-taking, and we expect some of that among youth and adolescents. It's the way youth are. And so we're not sure how much of this is over and above what we'd expect anyway. And when you progress to daily use, that's where there's been more concern. And if you look at the daily use patterns, cigarette use is still the most frequent product used daily. And e-cigarette use is more common for any past 30-day use, but not for daily use at all.
Dr. Abrams, for parents out there, they're looking for an answer regarding vaping that's not couched in terms that have a bunch of equivocations and stuff like that from regulation. They just want to know. They want to know, is it safe?
Sure, and that's the first obvious question. And there's been a lot of confusion out there that is cast in scientific terms. So first, let me say I'm both a parent and now a grandparent of a 14-year-old granddaughter who has in fact asked me about vaping. So what I'm going to say now is what I would say to my own grandchild as well as to anybody else. And to the best of our knowledge of the science, vaping is much safer than smoking any combusted or burning any tobacco product. So the answer is unequivocally, it's much safer. It's obviously not completely safe. Nothing is if you're going to do something. So nicotine can be addictive, but when you decouple the smoke from the toxic chemicals in the burning of tobacco from the nicotine, you have a much safer product. There's no question that I would rather my granddaughter did nothing and didn't use anything, but I want her to know the whole truth, which is, yes, vaping is much safer than smoking any type of cigarette.
Dr. Abrams, FDA also asserts, based on primarily the Surgeon General's warning in late 2016, that nicotine harms developing brains. Is there scientific evidence for this claim?
I think that's been overblown, not only in the secondary reports of the Surgeon General, but in the press. The truth is that we have no strong human evidence that nicotine damages the brain at all. These come from animal studies, which you can often not easily generalize to humans. There is a concern that nicotine chemically will change the brain, just like sugar or any other chemical. And over time, that could lead to an addiction that in adulthood would make it harder to stop using nicotine. So there's certainly something to say there that nicotine can change the way the brain works. But I think using words like brain damage or damages the adolescent brain, that's true of rats and mice. It's not true of humans as far as we know from the current research.
How does one square the fact that the top public health regulator in the world is pushing out this line that nicotine harms developing brains and using it as a raison d'etre for cracking down on a multi-billion-dollar a year industry that exists to help save lives?
Yeah, and you know, there's actually fairly strong evidence that's not cited that after 40, 50, and 60 years of heavy nicotine use among adults, especially in Sweden, where they've switched from a burnt tobacco product to snus, which is simply non-inhalable nicotine that you take in a little smokeless tobacco pouch. If there was brain damage there, we would have seen it because they use heavy doses of nicotine for 40 or 50 years. Not only that, there's suggestive evidence that actually nicotine can be beneficial to the brain. There's fairly strong evidence that nicotine, because it's in the same chemical products actually as caffeine and attention deficit disorder drugs, nicotine for sure improves concentration, alertness, memory, and information processing without increasing errors. And there is evidence in older people that nicotine can enhance brain function.
Now, this is the division inside the divisiveness inside public health that you speak about in your recent paper, and it's fantastic. The title of it is Managing Nicotine Without Smoke. Why this paper? Because I know that you had one out earlier in 2018. That was the Public Health Review, right?
Correct.
And this one contains much of the same material. However, you're much more precise and I would say, much more forward stepping in terms of stating what the real problems are.
Sure. So 2 reasons why we did this. The science is increasing rapidly, and the strongest science is confirming dramatically less harmful. They do help smokers quit. They don't inhibit quitting, as some people have claimed. In fact, I would recommend any smoker try to switch and find an e-cigarette product and a sweet spot that allows them to switch. And the evidence has gotten so much stronger that we felt we had to update our annual review of public health within 6 months of publishing it. We also felt that we needed some stronger language to challenge what we regard as extremely weak science that has been exaggerated to create this misinformation about the harms of e-cigarettes in particular and the harms of nicotine in particular. And in fact, I also emphasized again that Commissioner Gottlieb of the FDA and Mitch Zeller made a very strong statement that in their new comprehensive approach, nicotine, although not harmless, is not the major cause of cardiovascular disease, cancer, or pulmonary disease. It's the toxins in the burnt tobacco. The fact that that's been challenged has created so much confusion in the public's eye that we felt we had to make much stronger statements about what the science really says when you put it all together with the latest evidence. And it's getting stronger and stronger in support of harm reduction and switching if you can't quit.
So you're in the media capital of the world. So I would imagine NBC, CBS, ABC, CNN, MSNBC, they're all beating down your door right now to get interviews so they can share that news with the American public.
Well, that is partly true. However, I also think what I call the status quo traditional tobacco control groups are still very connected, very powerful, and are influencing the WHO, the EU, and many American politicians and news media. And I would just encourage the news media to dig much deeper with their questions than the superficial initial statements that are made. Because it's easy to say, of course, we're against any youth or non-smoker using any product. And frankly, I agree with that. I think we should do everything we can to keep all of these novel products away from underage youth. But I think that can be done with traditional, very effective enforcement, age 21 checks, limits media predatory marketing, and yet it can be done without necessarily demonizing nicotine in these products, which we know can help any smoker. And I would add potential smoking youth who are going to smoke anyway. And most of them will be smoking unless we encourage them to use an alternative product. And those things are not mentioned. So I think there are lots of errors of omission where the whole story isn't told. And so the media gets very attracted to that playbook, if you will. And so it's hard for us to tell the whole truth in that context.
Did CNN interview you as a result of this report?
Yes, they did.
And how was the coverage?
And I have not seen the full balanced coverage of that interview. My recollection is that it either hasn't been aired yet or a very brief soundbite was aired in the context of a much more overwhelming story about the concerns about e-cigarettes and youth, eclipsing everything and not talking about the possible benefits of saving 37 million smokers' lives. And you do have to balance both. You know, protecting kids and, as you said, selling 37 million smokers down the tubes is not acceptable. And telling the truth to the public, whether it's youth or adults, is really important. The whole truth, not simply that nicotine is not harmless, but also that nicotine in a delivery form like an e-cigarette is substantially less harmful than combusted tobacco. And I think Everybody should know that. It's not a good idea to lie to youth to protect them, especially not in the digital media age. I think you lose your credibility by not telling the whole truth to the whole public.
Well, and it's not just youth they're lying to parents, they're lying to politicians, local governments, they're lying to educators. I mean, they're lying to everybody, aren't they?
Yeah, and lying may be a strong word, and I think the issue is that they simply omit the most important facts, and that creates a dramatic misperception of the harms without the balancing benefits. And so, that is regarded as misinformation and disinformation in the strongest sense of the word. Errors of omission are as important in consumer protection law. And often when you don't say what you should be saying, that's where words like consumer fraud get raised if you are a commercial company. So I think we should all be taking care to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, which includes the benefits and the harm-reduced benefits of these new alternative products, as well as the fact that we, of course, want to keep them away from youth. And I think that, again, there are ways to do that without distorting the harms.